All right, you think we're ready to get started, Ash?
Yeah, I think so. Looks like we've got a pretty good quorum. So
All
let's go
right,
ahead and kick things off.
sounds good. So as I mentioned today, it's mostly about strategy, and we'll touch a little bit on some nerdy stuff, some product knowledge. But for me, to really feel that this was a good conversation today, I want to be able to ensure that this crew understands some questions that will help guide you to your customers' battery needs, gain confidence in sizing differences between self-consumption and battery backup scenarios. So we kind of now, in a lot of different places, have two options. We have the self-consumption and we have the battery backup. And then discover how to easily explain those values to homeowners because that can get really complicated. And so we want to really simplify it. Before we jump in, I would love to hear from this group, just in the chat box, what percentage of your sales lately have been, or let's say this year, roughly, have had a battery on them? I want to see how many, percentage wise, um, what percentage of your deals have a battery on them typically? Oh, Colleen's really specific, 66%. Must actually know that number. Um, yeah, well, I mean, what's so interesting is I'll say even last year, year before, we were seeing like 15, 20% a lot. And now it's upwards of that 60, 70, 80%. So we got to get really good at having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you think about all of the utility policies across the US that have been changing, that have really been starting to de-incentivize stuff like the amount that you get for net metering. Batteries become really, really critical. A lot of people I talk to in California, it's nearly 100% of their installs are including batteries now.
Yeah. And I think the moral of the story overall, what we're seeing is leading with a battery every time is advantageous in most cases because you're also combating that misconception that homeowners a lot of the time have as, hey, if I go solar, when the power goes out, I'm going to have power, right? That's always kind of a misconception. If people haven't gotten a quote or a proposal yet, you often have to backtrack and let them know that's not the case. If you lead with a battery, then they really do. That is the true freedom and independence of electricity, when you have that battery system. So we're seeing that being really advantageous. All right, so let's jump in. I like to think of kind of two types of homeowners. So these are the two that you would have when we're talking about batteries. Storage for bill savings. And that's in these situations that Ash is talking about where net metering is no longer advantageous. Sending energy back to the grid is no longer advantageous in those territories. Just a quick chat group, who can tell me what states we're talking about here? And it might be more than you think. How many states now is it viable to do a self-consumption battery? Shout out your state if you have it. Now we talked about California. Yep. Joe says California. What other ones? Yes. Look at all of these. Illinois, Hawaii. There's a couple more. We're selling quite a bit of self-consumption batteries. New Mexico. What other ones, Ash, do you have on your list that you
I think
see?
Michigan was on that list, right?
Michigan, parts of Texas. Um, and really, and so Jaime says Tennessee. Tennessee as well, if you have this situation where sending back to the any situations where sending back to the grid is not going to give you a good rate of electricity of credit back, what I like to say to homeowners is we want you to touch the grid as little as possible. Become your own power plant, generate your own energy and use your own energy. Don't export that energy and don't take that energy from the grid. Touch the grid as little as possible. I see a couple more here. Texas, Arizona. Those are the ones. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's that storage for bill savings guy. Maybe they don't have outages. Like Arizona, for example, has a pretty stable grid. We're seeing that this storage for bill savings is good. But then batteries for backup power for those homeowners that want that resiliency in an outage. Of course, across the country, we're seeing more and more outages, so this is applicable. And just a quick question here. Why do we want to delineate this? Like, why would we want a battery without backup? What would be the use case for that? What's the advantage? Anybody have an idea? What's the advantage for having a battery without backup? Like, why wouldn't you just put backup on everything? Ash, what's your reason for that?
Yeah, it can be kind of a confusing question because you think as a consumer, why wouldn't you want battery backup if you had the option? But when you're thinking about the actual install, installing that backup interface, that takes an electrician, which makes that whole process a lot more complicated, a lot more expensive. So in a case where somebody just doesn't really have that appetite for backup power, why not eliminate some of that cost for them? After all, with Solaredge's technology, you can always add that on later on down the line if they start experiencing some outages.
Yes, so totally right. Reminder, we have this full ecosystem of products. Your system is always going to have optimizers and an inverter. And then we have those batteries, that backup interface that Ash talked about, where if you want backup power, we're going to have that. We're going to dive in that to that a little bit more. We have an EV charger, and then we have these things called load controllers. So those load controllers you can put on heavy loads, and it will allow you to automatically shut off those loads um, when there's an outage. So that gives you the opportunity to do whole home backup with any type of battery solution, and that will turn off those heavy loads automatically. But let's dive into these different situations. Now, Ash is like totally right. The rate saver is what we call it, but the self-consumption battery, what Jaime here is saying, using it for arbitrage, using it for time of use, that is a much less expensive solution because you don't have to set your home up for backup. You're not relocating those loads. You're not putting a backup interface. The electrician work is just not that substantial. In fact, we're actually seeing that the same people that can install solar panels can install an arbitrage battery because it's just a big box they're putting on the wall. We're using it as a bucket to store energy, and then we're discharging that, so that we can use it in the house. So really it boils down to that question of why wouldn't I put backup on every single house, even if the homeowner doesn't really need backup and is using it for arbitrage? It's really a less expensive solution. If that homeowner doesn't need backup capabilities today, this is at least the least expensive solution for those markets that don't have great net metering policies for export. That said, just like Ash said, you can put backup on it later because if you see, this is that box that's missing in that self-consumption conversation. If that's the backup interface, disconnecting the home from the grid. So with Solaredge, you can do full home backup. You can have up to 9 batteries on the house if you need to. So that would be 90 kilowatt hours, 3 batteries per inverter. So up to 30 kilowatt hours per inverter. Essential home backup, 1 battery, 2 batteries. So 10 kilowatt hours, 20 kilowatt hours. And then that rate saver, which is let's use it as a bucket to store that energy. Okay, so those are kind of the 3 different options. So really it boils down to we have those 2 kind of customer profiles, right? Battery for bill savings and then battery for backup. How do we figure out which customer this customer is? And it's needs analysis, right? Asking the right questions. And just to make sure we are all on the same page, there's really 3 things in needs analysis that are important. You want to understand that homeowner's motivations, align with their priorities, and uncover their concerns. And this also to me is uncovering any misconceptions so that you can make sure to address those. Ash, just right off the top of your head, how long do you think like a needs analysis usually takes?
Oh gosh, needs analysis can be the longest part of the consultation, depending on how deep you dig in with that homeowner. I would say that easily my needs analyses were somewhere between they could run from 20 to 40 minutes during the consultation, depending on what's going on.
Hmm. Yeah, I think bottom line is it's usually the longest part of the conversation, right? Is we really want to address those customers' needs and listen to them. Before we jump into the next slide, I do want to address this really good question in the chat. Can you talk about the life of a backup battery? So it looks like, generally 10 to 12 years on batteries is what Mandar is seeing. And let's talk about that. So warranty wise, so our warranty specifically states that um, it is a 10-year warranty. We guarantee at that 10-year mark that they will have 70% usable life left on that battery. So it's not to say they have to replace it at 10 years. It's to say we guarantee that at the 10-year mark, they'll have 70% of usable life left on that battery. If they don't, it's within warranty and it will be replaced. So I hope that that makes sense. You're totally right that just the behavior of a battery is that in any battery, phones, like you said, cars, everywhere, they're always going to degrade a little bit over time, just like sometimes when you plug in your, I know that some of you have iPhone 4s still lying around there. Sometimes when you plug that in, it doesn't keep a charge, right? That's what happens to batteries. But in this case, our solar batteries, the warranty states 10 years, we guarantee 70% usable life. So it will last well beyond that 10 years.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point there, Michelle. Some of those older cell phones that are from, 15 years ago are still operating today. So, whereas we can't guarantee that lithium-ion batteries are going to last that long, they are going to surpass that 10 year.
Yeah, and I only bring up an iPhone 4 because my husband manages to continue using an iPhone 4. So it's a sore spot. Okay, so let's talk about um, the two different situations we might be running into in a needs analysis. Okay, so here's that big discovery question. And just remember, these are the discovery questions to uncover battery needs. So you'll ask, tell me about the last time you experienced a power outage at your home. I like to ask that big, broad question because it allows that homeowner to really answer thoroughly, as opposed to just asking something like, do you have power outages here? Closed questions, right? This is a what we call a thoughtful question, something that helps them to explain in more detail. Tell me about the last time you experienced a power outage in your home. Okay. So this will really open up that conversation. But what if that customer says this? I haven't had a power outage for more than maybe 20 minutes in the last 10 years of living here. So I'm going to put this on Ash. If your customer said this to you, would you continue driving the backup conversation or would you move over to potentially a self-consumption conversation?
Yeah, I mean, if they haven't had more than 20 minutes of outages in 10 years, I think I'm going with the self-consumption solution there.
Mhm.
It's just going to be a more affordable option for that homeowner.
Yeah, and I would say I don't see that there being really a wrong answer here. I would agree with you that I'd probably pivot over to self-consumption. I might ask one more question of like, do you see outages being a concern to you in the near future? Something like that. But sometimes we tend to oversell stuff that's not important to homeowners. So if that customer said, no, I don't see that as a concern, then let's drop it and maybe go to self-consumption, right? So, okay, so this guy, he doesn't have outages, but self-consumption could be a great solution for him. And remember, it's really becoming your own power plant. We don't touch the grid. We want to limit our interaction with the grid as much as possible. So here's the perfect candidate for what we call rate saver, which is that self-consumption battery. So we don't want to use power from the grid and we don't want to export that power unless it's advantageous to the homeowner. So in some of these areas, there are times when it's advantageous for the homeowner, like in a time of use scenario, right? We want to discharge that battery at the high peak rates. But here's the difference. How many of us, just a quick show of hands, I think you guys have a hand raised. I just want to see, yeah. Who here is selling self-consumption batteries right now? It doesn't have to be Solaredge necessarily. Just raise your hand and you see a little raise your hand tool. Who here is selling self-consumption batteries? Perfect. Richard, great. Yeah, Michael, good to see you, man. All right, so okay, only selling backup switches. thank you for the info, guys. So for the team that has started selling this self-consumption situation, I think you can agree that the mindset shift of the actual sizing piece is kind of a big challenge because we're so used to talking about backup when we're talking about batteries. And so we always go to the mode of, well, how many loads do you want to back up? That kind of conversation. But with the rate saver, remember, we're not backing anything up. So then what does the conversation go to? Ash, what would be like the next question you would ask this homeowner if we're trying to size a self-consumption battery?
Yeah, if we're trying to size a self-consumption battery, I think one of the things I would want to find out, because it becomes really important in this scenario, is do they work from home? What hours are they actually at home? Because what becomes a lot more important is that daily consumption. Are we going to have enough out of one battery to cover them when they need that electricity? So I would start talking about what their lifestyle looks like, how many people are in the home, if they work from home, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, Joseph's a pro here. He says green data. Absolutely. This is like, yeah, green button data. And for people that don't know what that is, I mean, Californians, right? We know that. But for people that don't know that, it's really daily consumption habits becomes much more important in these situations. Just like Ash said, if they work from home, if they don't work from home. Because if you think about it, how the objective is, how can we charge the battery fully so that they can discharge at times when they use energy the most? So if you think about during the day, four-person family, they're all working outside of the house, they're going to school, they come back home 4 p.m. ish, and then they use the bulk of their energy from like 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., right? So that behavior is, how can we charge maybe two batteries up during the day when people aren't home so that we can discharge it during the bulk of the time where they actually need that energy? Whereas opposite, is that person working from home and are they using energy continuously throughout the day, consistently, where it's like it's not the bulk of time that they're using it in the night? And if that's the case, if maybe it's a one battery scenario where they're charging one during the day, but they're using a lot of their energy during the day also. So daily consumption habits is more important. Is there a particular size, Ash, that we look at in terms of like one versus two battery system size wise?
Not there's not an easy like one size fits all answer there. I think what we've seen from experience, at least here in California, is getting up into the range of about 8 kilowatt or so and below. That's where you can usually do just one battery for those self-consumption scenarios. Typically, and again, it's not a hard and fast rule. Typically, once you start getting over 8K and above, that's when you want to pivot up to two batteries for those
Mm-hmm.
consumption needs.
Yep. Yep, and I like to think of it as, remember, this is a 10 kilowatt hour bucket. It's it's a bucket that we're storing energy in. And on average, let's say that homeowner uses 30 kilowatt hours a day. How is that 30 kilowatt hours divided throughout the day? And will that 10 kilowatt hour bucket cover that portion of time where they're utilizing, that energy? Of course, by the way, we can still pull from the grid if we need to, but the objective is let's not pull from the grid as much as possible. We do see in most of these cases where net metering is not advantageous, though, that like between the hours of, midnight and 6 a.m., they're the lowest cost of energy. And so if they need to pull from the grid at that time just a tad, it's not going to hurt them that much. We really want to make sure that we're just offsetting those really high peak times, like between 4 and 9. All right. So I like to thank you for the questions. We're gonna get right to them. I like to use this slide actually with homeowners sometimes because when you start bringing up things like NEM3 or net metering and stuff, it becomes a conversation where they don't really understand the terminology. I want to make it really easy for them to understand. Sometimes also when you bring up the word battery, what are the misconceptions that homeowners have? Well, I don't have outages, so I don't need it. And it's too expensive. I've gotten a quote for batteries before, right? And so if we're talking about rate saver, if we're talking about self-consumption batteries, sometimes I just like to use the word storage. So I like to say, okay, Mr. Homeowner, what we want to do is we want to actually give you energy independence and freedom. We want you to become your own power plant. So what's going to happen is we want to run your home on solar during the day. We're going to store some of that energy so that when you have those high peak rates, I don't know if you've noticed on your utility bill, between the hours of 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., you have really high rates of electricity. What we want to do during that time is actually take the stored energy and run your house on that. So you're not pulling from the utility company. We're going to continue running your home on that stored energy throughout the night. And then same thing happens the next day. We're going to run your home on solar and store some more of that energy. So it's really a circular motion where you're using your own power as much as possible. So I kind of like to say it that way so that we're not bringing up batteries, we're not bringing up NEM3, we're not, it's not bringing in terminology that's too complex. All right, I saw some questions come through. Ash, anything we want to address here?
Yeah, we had a good question here from Alan that wants to talk a little bit more about selling in states like Pennsylvania and New Jersey that have one-for-one net metering, and how can we make this makes financial sense for that use case?
Yeah. So great question, and also good to see you, Alan. There's some familiar faces here on this call today. Um, New Jersey still has SREX, which is incredible. And I think in most cases in New Jersey, what we see, and we can dive in further as well separately, is backup power is usually the value add for them. The self-consumption solution, it hasn't quite hit that market yet. Backup is still the value prop. And it's really like resiliency, peace of mind, making sure that in those winter months, if you have outages, you'll have power. And so the financial sense is, sometimes we're not selling, actual savings, but we're selling actual value, resiliency, those types of things. And that's just as valuable. And then, just one last thing here is we often see that in those markets, one battery will probably suffice because your homeowners can keep it back, in backup mode if they want, or frankly, if they wanted to discharge it and become their own power plant and use it during the day, that's totally fine too. I do want to make sure everybody here knows that if your homeowners have a backup battery, they can also use that for arbitrage and self-consumption. It just means that when they have an outage, their power goes out, they'll have power to those loads.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're having those traditional backup conversations, like where it always comes down to for me is what is that peace of mind worth to you? And when we break that down to, the daily cost, would you pay, let's call it $1 to $2 a day to have that peace of mind that if the power goes out, your family's still going to have those critical things online?
That's a good point. I really like also that too, where you boil it down to $1 a day, $2 a day, that type of thing, because I don't think anybody can think of something we spend $1 a day on. I think parking is usually more expensive than that at this point. All right. I just want to address, Richard, your point, battery burning my house down. Are we still seeing that objection in the field? I would love to hear if we're still seeing that. That said, one thing that you can say, at least from the Solaredge side, is that Solaredge has the highest safety standard available in the market. So UL 9540A certification. Essentially, what that means is we've attempted to set that thing on fire internally, externally. We put it underwater. We tried, and it didn't ignite. So those are kind of the very severe testing measures that they do on these batteries, these solar home batteries. And then yes, sales tools, Doug, good one. We're getting there on the sizing. We're actually going to go right now on the battery backup piece. So this is the more complex one when you're doing the battery backup side, right? So let's go back to that question we asked the homeowner. So now here's the scenario. What if you ask the homeowner, tell me about the last time you experienced a power outage at your home? And they said, gosh, I just had one about a month ago. I felt like they've gotten worse over the year. Okay. So this is now backup, right? And this is going to require more questions. These are my favorite ones to ask. Would love to hear, team, if there are ones that you're asking that work really well in these scenarios. But I like to ask, how long did that last one last? What was the duration? How often do you experience outages? What was the impact to your family? And my favorite one, what is your plan for the next outage? What's usually the answer there? Ash?
The answer usually, if they're not getting a battery backup system, is I don't know. I'll just kind of deal with it when it happens, I guess.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love these questions. I think that that last one that we've got, what would you like to keep running during the outage? I like to kind of ask that in the inverse too, of like, hey, when you had that last outage, bring your mind back to that. What did you miss the most when you had that outage? What did you want to run that you couldn't?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and Richard, such a good point here on the generator. So, like, maybe what's your plan for the next outage? That customer says, I'm going to get a generator. Okay. That's a really great option. Mr. Homeowner, why are you considering a generator versus maybe a solar backup system that automatically will power your home in an outage with clean energy? Doesn't require any maintenance, doesn't require from you any additional, concrete slabs, anything like that. Have you considered looking into a backup system for your solar solution? I would like to do that because, like, let's not just squash the generator piece. Maybe there's something that can work, and they can coincide with one another. Maybe they get one battery and a generator. This can happen too. So I would, to your point, ask several other questions about the generator piece because it could be something that you can help them with a automatic clean energy system, as opposed to them having to go shop for a generator.
Yeah, one thing I love on this point too, Michelle, is that when you think about energy storage system with a solar system versus a generator, well, that energy storage system, that's not just going to be backup for you. You're going to get usage out of that every day because beyond backup capability, you can also use that for rate arbitrage.
Hmm.
So you're going to be getting savings from your energy storage system every single day, where the generator is only really going to be useful when the power goes out.
Right. Yep. So this last one is going to help us to transition to the conversation of loads and what loads that homeowner wants to back up. So if you could ensure some things kept running during an outage, what would you prioritize? This kind of coincides with this question of what was the impact to your family? You might get answers like, well, we threw away all of our food in the fridge. It was like $600 worth of food. My kids were running around in the dark. We didn't have any lights on. They didn't have internet. They didn't have TV. And so that will help to paint the picture of the loads as well. But this will really help them to prioritize, which loads are critical in that next outage. And it'll allow you to help size for that homeowner. All right. So I think now it sounds like, on this call specifically, we are kind of pros now at sizing batteries and selling batteries. But just remember that there's a really big difference between large loads and smaller loads. The smaller loads we're going to be able to back up those with more flexibility. The large loads is when we start having to add additional batteries. So large loads, things like air conditioners, heat pumps, washer dryer units. I don't know who's wanting to do laundry in an outage, but maybe. Small loads, lights, internet, fridge, stove tops, those things that are critical that we have to keep on. This also can be things like window units, fans, those types of things. And so if you have a homeowner that says something like, I want to back up my air conditioner, usually that is generally the first thing they think of because it was hotter than heck last time they had an outage, right? But to have the conversation with the homeowner of, well, would you consider, some fans, things like that? It's going to be more cost effective potentially to not back up these very heavy loads. It's going to require additional batteries. Yeah, and Richard, I mean, look, if they want additional batteries, you can do that, right? That is an option. Let's talk about how we do this. For the sales rep knowledge, it's important to know the difference between power and capacity. So when we talk about batteries, 10 kilowatt hours, for example, with Solaredge, that's capacity. That's how long things will stay running. Kilowatt hours, it's a duration of time. And this is how long those things will continue running. But what about power? That's how many things can run at one time. And so for the Solaredge battery, 5 kilowatts per battery. And so this is how many things can you run at once? And also, what is the actual power push to turn on those loads, right? So surge power is what we think of for that. And what's the power push that's going to turn on these loads? And so when you think about heavy loads, large loads like an air conditioner, they're going to require more of a heavier power push. So that's also why we need, so maybe, for example, this homeowner says, well, I've only have outages for like an hour, 2 hours at a time, but I want to make sure my air conditioner runs. That is going to require at least two batteries because you need the power push. You need to be able to turn on that heavy stuff. Whereas, here's a different example. Well, I don't need the heavy loads. I just need lights, fridge, internet, and maybe the stovetop. And I've had some extended outages, 6, 7 hours. Okay, well, great. That actually doesn't require a very heavy power push because those are light loads. So you could actually go with one battery, even though it's a longer duration, you don't need that heavy power push. Okay, so just some considerations on that. And I do like to use the cell phone analogy for homeowners, even if, say, they're getting 2, 3 batteries. Conservation is still key. Like if they're going to run that air conditioner and they're going to have their thermostat down to 65, that's going to drain that battery quick. And so any situation here, like it's the same thing with the cell phone. All batteries are functioning the same. If you're using your phone to make calls and texts versus using it to stream a video, how does that affect your battery life? Right? It drains that battery faster. If you use the really heavy loads in your house, air conditioner, it's going to drain that battery really fast. So just like we talked about the functionality of batteries earlier, this is another piece that its functionality of batteries is the same in any scenario we have. All right, so here is a quick and dirty little cheat sheet for backup, and I use this for homeowners too. A lot of times this is nice to have when you're explaining these pieces to homeowners. So it also kind of matters what types of loads we're backing up, intermittent versus continuous. And this is really one battery, you can back up 6 to 8 loads, 3 of those being continuous loads, things that are going to run the whole time. And then intermittent. So this is based on kind of lifestyle. You turn on the lights in the living room, you turn on the lights in the bedroom, turn off the lights in the bedroom, leave the lights on in the living room. It's the things that you can turn on and off. Those are intermittent loads. Okay, so Richard's asking me to back up really quick. This one, and we're going to send this actually to all of you guys as well. So we're going to send the presentation and the recording and a fun little video that Ash made that's really quick. So we'll make sure to send that over to you after this call as well. Okay. All right. Oops. Now I'm really messed up. Okay, so let's go back to the sizing piece. One battery, essential loads. I will say that recently, 2 batteries has been a really good sweet spot. Like if you want to lead with a 2 battery system, That's going to do a couple things for you as a salesperson. That's going to give your homeowner flexibility to add a bit of heavier loads. Maybe they have a 3-ton AC. Maybe they have a split system in their house or a small portable heater, something like that they want to back up. A 2 battery system would be great for that. So that would give your homeowner some more flexibility there. It also, if you lead with 2 batteries, gives you as the salesperson the chance to pare one down if you need to, right? So maybe you talk about it with the homeowner and say, I would recommend, based on what you need, what you have said your priorities are, a 2 battery system. And they say, whoa, that is way more than I thought it was going to be. I don't think I can afford that. Okay, great. Let's actually look what it would be for a 1 battery system. Would you actually be willing to maybe pare down the amount of loads you're backing up? Maybe you take off the 3-ton AC unit that you were planning and go to, fans in the house for an outage instead. Like, these are the kind of conversations you can have when you're able to pare down to a 1 battery system if needed. If you start with a 1 battery system and then that homeowner says, well, but I want to add a 3-ton AC, it's much more difficult to now add one more battery and give them a bigger bill, right? So leading with 2 batteries and paring down has been advantageous. So for those homeowners that have 5-ton ACs, pool pumps, they insist on backing up. Uh, Heaters, heavy heaters. These are 3+ battery systems. We'll do a bit more load calculations for that. Usually your technical team or your ops team is going to help you with that. Those are going to be 3, 4, 5 battery systems.
Yeah, and I love the mentality of starting with everything that homeowner's telling you. Starting at the bigger battery systems, because what we find with a lot of homeowners is they're talking about backup and they're like, yeah, why wouldn't I back up my whole home, without the understanding that that's going to continue to add more batteries to the system. So in a lot of cases, the homeowner does have a perfect scenario that may not meet with where the financial scenario is right now. And the good news is that we can help them build towards that year 2, year 3 as their finances change a little bit. But being able to pare down to that solution that makes the most sense for them today is awesome.
Yeah. And like Ash said earlier, being able to say this is going to cost $2 a day, $6 a week, those types of things is going to help that conversation be more digestible than to say something like, this 2 battery system is going to be $20,000 added to your cost. That is a little bit more challenging to overcome. All right, so shout out to generators everywhere. So this is just bringing it back to the generator conversation. A lot of locations like Texas and Florida and places, actually, they already have a generator at their house. And it's our job to talk to them about solar and potentially the advantages of adding a battery in addition to their generator. And the Solaredge system, that backup interface, and I wanted to show a real picture here of the installation because this is that backup interface I mentioned. Um, this allows you to integrate that generator. So the behavior is when that battery is depleted, let's say it's an outage scenario, that battery is fully drained, it's going to kick on that generator automatically to take over the brunt of the work for the outage, to make sure that homeowner still has power in an outage. So our system does work with generators as needed. Okay, so a couple quick things on my Solaredge, and then I'm going to really look into these questions that are in chat. So if you don't have my Solaredge downloaded on your phone yet, I'd highly recommend it. It shows your homeowner how much solar is using and where that energy is going. You as a sales rep have the opportunity to use the demo sites on that app to show your homeowners in real time that interaction with real sites. All right, we went through a lot today. There's a lot of great questions I want to make sure that we cover. Again, objectives, we want to understand those questions, gain confidence in sizing between self-consumption and battery backup, and then how to easily explain those values without getting too complex for those homeowners. All right, let's go to the questions. Ash, anything you're seeing in here? I hope I didn't lose some of the chat. I don't know what
Yeah, it
happened.
looks like I can see a couple here too. One is there a maximum size generator that we can use with our system?
Yeah, so usually 22 kW is what we're seeing for the maximum size, and it has to have an auto start stop switch associated with it, which most will. Even the portable ones now typically will have that.
Awesome. Looks like we have another question. This one gets a little technical. What are your recommendations to comply with the current fire regulations in FPA 2023 for interior and garage installations?
Yeah, Brad, good question. So we can reach out to you separately on that specifically. Obviously, the individual AHJs have different regulations. That said, again, we do have the highest safety standard certification. So typically that will help us get through those specific regulations. There are some areas that will require things like ballasts, bollards, or some sort of interior structure built. So we will follow up with you on that and see specifically for your AHJs what we can do. All right. Other questions?
I'm not seeing any more so far.
Yeah, I mean, thank you guys for asking the questions throughout the conversation too. Really, really great. Okay, let's see. So question is, it seems that when installing less than whole home, there is a lot of wiring needed to be done to a load controller. Do you have an idea as to the average number of hours it takes installers? So I think that what you mean is, well, yeah. So there's a couple of options here. You can either back up the entire, and this is probably what's happening in your area, Alan, is like you're backing up the entire main panel and then adding load controllers into that main service panel. Alternatively, in some areas, you instead create a sub panel, and that's the backup panel where you just move those loads and relocate the loads that you want to back up. So there's kind of two different scenarios. Both of those require um, an electrician, like a skilled electrician on site to do that. Um, and this is somewhat of a general answer that I know that you won't love, but it really is based on like location of main service panel, ease of getting into the service panel, size of the service panel. Um, if that electrician has done this multiple times and is skilled at this experience. That said, all I can say is that luckily we have now been able to we're seeing consistently across the board, battery installations are taking much less time than they have in the past. And I think it's really because people are getting more experienced with them. I mean, if you remember like 2 years ago, adding batteries was adding like an additional day or two to the installation. And now solar systems being installed with batteries generally can happen same day. As long as the electrician's available and they can get to the main service panel consistently. So I think that, the hours vary, but the goal has always been, recently at least, same day installations for batteries, even if it is backup. But there are a lot of variables associated. The load controller itself is not the hard wiring piece. It's really, um, ease of installation with location of main service panel and, what needs to be relocated versus what needs the load controller. So is there a template or let's see, sorry. Is there a template or recommendation that you guys have to quickly assess the wattage needs of HVAC and appliances? This would be very useful to size the correct amount of batteries at a sale. Yeah, really good question. So I do have a little calculator I can send in the follow-up. So we'll send it in the follow-up tools. Essentially, there is the only challenge is obviously HVACs are different sizes. They require different wattage pulls, that type of thing. You would have to look on the sticker of the actual HVAC and or the user manual of the HVAC to get really accurate. That said, there's a little bit of math you can do if you do have that information to kind of easily assess how many kilowatt hours you would need. to run it and also how much KW would need to turn it on. So I'll add that to our resources follow up. All right, team, this looks great. Just a reminder, and I'm going to put it in here, saleselite@solaredge.com is the magic email address that you can use to email us anytime. We prioritize questions coming through that email address because we assume you need an answer ASAP. Our assumption is you have a homeowner waiting on the line for that answer. And so please utilize that. It allows our team to get to you as soon as possible. And we want to make sure that you feel supported in any of these scenarios that we can help with. We know that battery specifically gets a bit complex. All right, everyone, thank you for joining. And we will definitely follow up with some additional resources. And there are a couple of specific regional questions that have come in, like Brad, and I see here Michelle. We will follow up with you on those specific regional questions as well. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone.